So what can we do? We're talking in this section on social sustainability and the challenges of social sustainability for management, for leaders in general. Why do we care? Why is this a big issue? Why does the United Nations come up with these Sustainable Development Goals as a plan for humanity, as for all of us? Well, we do have an increasing consilience of knowledge that, well, we're not really just caring about ourselves and money. We are human political beings, social animals endowed with reason. That's what Aristotle said 2,500 years ago. Darwin said that morality is a survival mechanism. Most people don't know that, and misunderstand Darwin. Morality is a function of our sociality, he says. If we're not moral, if we don't create some kind of value-based standard of how we treat each other, it's very difficult to survive. Just think about it. If you are with people that cheat you all the time, it's very hard to trust them. It's very hard to collaborate with them. Theology has admonished people over the time we know that we have universal shared values, and they created value systems around 10 commandments, for example, or golden rules: treat each other as you wish to be treated. And you have this essence in pretty much any of the religious traditions, ancient wisdoms. So E.O. Wilson says there is this consilience of knowledge about who we are as human beings, as those that care fundamentally about morality, about each other, and about how we live a good life. The humanistic perspective matches evolutionary insights with those from the humanities. And I want to just highlight how this may play out in your life. The independent drives in balance is when we feel a sense of accomplishment, when we feel alive, when we feel joy, when we're in community, when we do something together that's important, meaningful, when we trust each other, etc. We know from the research on high-performing teams that those teams that have those independent drives in balance are outperforming other teams. What people say is that you need to have a shared purpose in those high-performing teams. People trust each other. People have the skills and resources to do what they want or need to do. And there's psychological and physical safety. I put the drives back there. The shared purpose is addressing the drive to comprehend. Trust is addressing the drive to bond. The skills and resources to make things happen is the drive to acquire. And psychological and physical safety corresponds to the drive to defend. So if you're skydivers, like in this image here, and you can't trust each other, or you don't have the right resources, like the suits, or the material, or the airplane, you don't feel safe with each other, you don't have a higher shared purpose, then it's very hard to accomplish such feats and survive. Teams that don't have high trust, psychological safety, the skills and resources, if they fall out of the sky, they typically will die. High-performing teams, we know that they have these independent drives and balance through other kind of research that stresses how important it is to communicate. The communication is our way to bond, is our way to create meaning. We know that high-performing teams do have and pursue a meaningful purpose beyond making money. That doesn't mean that we don't need to have specific performance goals. It's not all social and soft in some way. People like to perform. People like to be accountable. And creating that kind of accountability is critical for high-performing teams. What happens when we violate this insight of balance? When imbalance occurs, when we maximize the drive to acquire, what we see is that we don't survive very well. This image to the right is a young man who worked himself to death. He was very ambitious, and he was working in London as an intern for an investment bank. He worked without getting enough sleep, and then he collapsed. Afterwards, the banking industry came together and said, we need to restrict intern workday to 17 hours in the wake of this burnout death. This was in 2015. Some of you might identify with this young gentleman. I do. I was ambitious. I wanted to work hard and prove myself. And yet, from an evolutionary perspective, this didn't make sense. He died. Most of us don't really feel healthy and well when we self-exploit to that degree. Bernie Madoff, which you might be familiar with, is now in prison. He was maximizing his drive to acquire. He cheated people, many people, out of billions of dollars. He's now in prison. And typically what people did in ancient times was such cheaters would be killed. The drive to acquire, when it maximized, is not helpful to survival. Now the same thing holds for the drive to bond. You see gangs, you see these nationalist movements, etc. When they maximize their drive to bond, meaning when they put the group above anything else, it typically isn't a good, smart thing for survival. Nationalist movements end oftentimes in wars. Gangs basically are known to be fighting, oftentimes violently, like in the picture below. People die because they maximize the drive to bond of belonging to a gang, a group, above anything else, above their own safety, above any kind of higher level meaning, and above their drive to acquire. Same thing can happen when people are maximizing the drive to comprehend. They become ideologues. They become suicide killers. The crusaders. The jihadists. They're happy to die for their sense of purpose and meaning. They don't care about the bond, they don't care about their own safety, they don't care about acquiring. Same thing can be said about the drive to defend. If you maximize that, this is a picture of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who basically lived by himself in some hut and felt threatened in his worldview and sent out bombs to people to kill them. He's also now in prison. And if the death penalty was in place, he probably would be put on the death penalty. The point here is that maximization is occurring quite a lot. And it's not helpful in terms of survival. Social sustainability is basically the challenge of balancing. When we don't balance at the individual level or the team level, when we have low psychological safety, when people do not like each other, when there's no consensus on purpose and direction of teams or low accountability towards, that's when teams don't work well. That's when humans don't work well. That's when we don't collaborate well. When all of these four drives are in balance, then organizations can flourish. Just to give you that sample again, many of those are cooperative models of organizing. And they're not that well known because they're not that big, because their ambition is not to maximize, but to be in balance. These kind of organizations, Enron, Lehman Brothers, etc., Wells Fargo, those were aimed to maximize, and they also went bankrupt. The drives were imbalanced. The drive to acquire was maximized at the expense of anything else. Social sustainability, and any kind of sustainability really, can happen only in terms of creating conditions for survival. And in this context, this four-drive theory can be helpful, understanding where we're going out of balance. And managers, smart managers, can take the hints, can understand of how to rebalance. Get into the safe and just zone of operating for humanity.